Bitcoin, Urbit, they literally come from the outside to dissolve those binds of the human security system.
Now you speak my language. This is good.
All right, everybody, what's going on? This is the Other Life Podcast. I am Justin Murphy. This episode is one in a whole series all about Urbit. Urbit is a whole new computing and networking paradigm that many of you know I've become very interested in recent months, really recent years, the past couple of years or so. I think Urbit is just way crazier and way cooler than most people realize. I think a lot of people are sleeping on Urbit and just don't really know about what's going on with it, what it is, and all the cool, badass people building Urbit, building things on Urbit, creating on Urbit. And so now the development of the technology is really picking up and moving faster. I decided that when the Urbit annual conference came to town in Austin this past October, that I would sit down with 10 different people all across the network, people who are building the technology, people who are creating on the network, and people just in this culture that still I think a lot of people don't know much about. So I can honestly say this was one of the most interesting experiences I ever had at any kind of conference, to be perfectly honest. I spoke with CEOs, I spoke with engineers, I spoke with e-girls from weird theory Twitter. Like, I'm not talking about Instagram chicks, I'm talking about like weird theory girls in, you know, the Other Life neck of the woods of the Twitterverse and the blogosphere. I talked with skitsed out writers and post everything podcasters, and very possibly I spoke even with an alien. I'm only half kidding. It was just wild, man. It was really, really wild. A really, really interesting set of characters you're about to meet over the next 10 episodes. And I'm just super pumped to bring this series out into the world. So real quick, before I forget, I do want to let you know, if you're interested in Urbit, it's now easier than ever to get onto the network. So I actually have a bunch of Urbit planets, aka Urbit ships, pretty much computers in the cloud, an individual computer in the cloud that can be yours. It also functions as your identity, and it's what you use to log onto the network and to use Urbit. So if you want to, I'll give you one. I have a bunch, and any listener of the show, I want to get you on Urbit. So you can just go to imperceptible.computer. I made a whole site just for this purpose. And yeah, drop your email and I will get you a planet, aka an Urbit ship. All right. Depending on whether you're listening to this now or 2 years from now, there may or may not be some kind of modest fee associated with it. Right now, I'm just giving them out for free. You don't need to have any coding or programming skills or experience whatsoever. It's very straightforward. I will give you your own planet and you'll be on the network playing around, talking to people in 5 minutes, probably. Okay. That's imperceptible.computer. I will put a link in the show notes. And the final thing real quick, and then we'll get on to the show. This whole series was a labor of love. It was my idea. No one paid me to do it. I did, however, find eventually sponsors so that it wasn't at all done at a loss. And I'm very grateful to those sponsors. So this episode in particular is sponsored by the Dalton Collective. Dalton is the name of the first collectively owned and managed Urbit star. It's a membership organization run on Urbit, of course, that's focused on fellowship, sustainability, and sovereignty. Dalton, it's a small group. It's a private group. They're not advertising because they want to build their membership massively or anything like that. It's a small private group, but they do have a public channel. So listeners of the podcast might want to go check out what they're up to, say hi to them. And, you know, if you're interested in those values, as am I, then you might find the Dalton Collective interesting. And they're one of the earliest groups really kind of building community on Urbit. So shout out to them. Big thanks to the Dalton Collective for sponsoring this episode. And I will put a link in the show notes to the Dalton Collective. All right. That's all from me. Let me get out of the way and on to the show.
All right. So thanks for coming out today, guys.
You're welcome, man. We're happy to be here.
I'm here with Logan and Christian from the Tirrel Corporation. Is that what you call it?
Yeah, Tirrel Corporation.
More Urbit than Urbit is our motto.
More Urbit than Urbit.
More Urbit than Urbit.
All right, we're going to try to find out what that means. So for people listening and watching, you guys are basically the first serious startup on Urbit. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say you can't really call Talon a startup. I mean, it was venture funded, but it was really founded as a research company. And they're trying to transition into being a product company. And I think that they're going pretty well with that so far, but you can't really call them a startup. But we're actually starting what is essentially a, risk-oriented venture around taking products to market on a new burgeoning technology. And That's definitely a startup.
So one simple way to put it is that you're building payment rails for Urbit, but unpack what that means in more detail. Like, what was the pitch to investors? What's the larger vision here? Just give us the elevator pitch version.
Sure. So we really have 3 arms, and I'm not going to give you the whole spiel on each of them, but the gist is we have our short-term plays, our medium-term plays, and our long-term plays, and those look different because of the opportunities that are present within the Urbit space. So short-term, we're making markets. Medium-term, we're more or less connecting merchants to people who want to do payments on US dollars. And then long-term, we're looking into and doing all kinds of various crypto and money related ventures.
Okay.
Urbit R&D, if you will.
Yeah.
Urbit R&D. Okay. So a few different possibilities. What is most interesting most immediately on the payments front when it comes to Urbit? Like what are payments going to look like in the short term on Urbit?
Sure. So I think our MVP is something akin to an Urbit Substack, which will let ordinary content creators using the affordances that exist on Urbit today publish content to Urbit, but then beyond that, publish content to the external web through websites and mailing lists, and then obviously get paid for it in a subscription format.
All right, badass. And now, Christian, why are boomers the worst with smartphones?
Well, I guess they didn't grow up with them. So yeah, as I was saying, at classical music concerts, I can't tell you how many have been completely destroyed by boomers letting their Nokia ringtone go off or something.
Do you think it's because they don't know how to work the phones, or they forgot that they have bad memory, or maybe they just have no respect for public space? What's the theory? What's the theory?
It's ironic because they usually have more respect for. I guess you could say they have more respect for that art form than Zoomers, but they don't have the muscle memory of silencing their phone, or they haven't adapted to just keeping it off 100% of the time.
Good theories. I don't know if you have any observations on boomers.
I just feel like generally people in the boomer generation and the Gen X always have a notion that a phone call is going to be somewhat important and something that they should look at. And so they're more prone to actually putting it off of silent in the first place because they're coming from an era where they had fewer ways to communicate instantly. And so if they're receiving a phone call, they're like, oh, maybe someone needs to get in touch with me right now. Whereas I always keep my phone on silent. And most people I know do that because if you actually want to get in touch with me quickly, you're probably going to text me.
Right. Alternative hypothesis is just that people younger than boomers don't use the phone calls as much. They text.
Or at least they don't place importance upon it.
Right. Okay. So
like I always schedule phone calls as opposed to.
This reminds me of something I was just talking about a couple hours ago with Ed, who was on the podcast a couple hours ago. We were talking about the future of Urbit on machines and hardware. And is this something you guys are interested in? Do you see a future where I'm going to be able to order online like a $500 laptop that's just going to have Urbit on it, and it only Urbit, and all my entire computer is just Urbit? Is that what do you guys have takes on like the Urbit hardware nexus?
Oh man, you really are fishing for controversy. Okay, so unlike Ed, I don't think we're anywhere close to Urbit hardware. I think Urbit hardware is it actually requires an entirely new operating system to be written to do a fundamental portion of Urbit hardware.
All my excitement from Ed is now
which is graphics.
Okay.
Arvo. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with NOC, a NOC-based computer system running on hardware. And in fact, it's actually fairly easy to get a unikernel, so a hardware kernel that is only specialized to run an Urbit interpreter. That's actually fairly easy. I expect we'll get that in 2022 at some point. But to actually have a computer or a phone, say, that you boot into a graphical interface that you can do stuff in, that does graphical compositing. So it actually like renders images and things on the page, and it's all happening in a NOC-based computer. That's extremely far down the line because of the actual architecture of Arvo, the only current NOC-based operating system, which is colloquially referred to as Urbit OS. But essentially, Arvo is an excellent system for doing REST APIs. It's a really good system for doing personal server-like activities where you want to have a database, you want it to have an API, you want that API to either be a peer-to-peer protocol, or you want it to expose itself to the traditional web, and maybe you want it to serve some web pages.
Okay, interesting. So maybe not Urbit hardware.
But,
interesting debate.
But the thing is it's single-threaded. It can do one thing at a time, and it can't do anything in parallel. And there's some hacks that people have talked about, and I think that they're very credible ways to get parallelism within the system to make it faster. But you're never going to get to a point where you're running GPU-oriented code on something that's meant to be a single-threaded, fully ordered event loop.
Okay, interesting.
And you need a totally different OS model that is GPU-oriented as opposed to CPU-oriented, because CPUs do things sequentially and GPUs do everything in parallel.
Okay, fascinating. And so maybe just tell us a little bit about like how has it been building a business on Urbit? Like, was this a hard sell? Is there like a ton of money? Is there a ton of capital waiting in the wings to be investing on Urbit? Was it a hard sell? How did it go?
There's galaxies, of course, and I'm proud to say that a majority of our investors are Galaxy holders. So we can definitively say that Urbit can actually bootstrap its own ecosystem financially, at least for the time being. And with regard to the tech stack that we're starting with, I think it's remarkable how many affordances you get just right out of the box. And really, it's almost as if we're putting small perfecting touches and small advancements, simply just reconnecting the building blocks that already exist.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's go into more detail now, because I think a lot of people watching and listening are probably thinking like, wait a minute, people are building a startup on Urbit. I thought you could barely use Urbit. I didn't even think that many people use Urbit. That's what a lot of people are going to be thinking. So what does it look like to actually build a company on Urbit? What are these affordances you're talking about that actually make it easy? Help for the kind of skeptical person who doesn't understand all the activity on Urbit, like unpack that and explain that.
Sure. So first off, Urbit has an extremely rabid user base. And so really, if you want to build something, you want to distribute it, you need to be building something that's catering to the existing user base and that's making it possible for them to do more than they already can. And right now that's extremely easy because all they can do is basically Discord. And so any other product niche on Urbit is totally wide open right now. So unlike in the traditional web, where if you want to build a note-taking app, there's thousands.
The note-taking app wars.
Yeah, there's thousands.
Right.
And there's never a way for you to differentiate yourself whatsoever. You're like, oh, well, I'm going to make money with subscriptions, or I'm going to make money with in-app payments or whatever. But regardless, your product is just like everything else. It just maybe has a different font and a different color scheme. And it's pretty shitty because, you're never going to make a way for people to export their data really easily and be able to edit it really easily. And so you have all of these systems that are trying to kind of close people in, like Evernote. It's like, oh, well, it syncs from your desktop to your phone, to your web, and all this stuff. But there's like a billion other things that do exactly that. And so all of these companies have such a hard time differentiating themselves. But on the Urbit ecosystem, you essentially have a captive audience because anyone that's committed to using Urbit is wanting Urbit specific products. And so the joy of it is like the Urbit standard library, all the stuff you can do with the Urbit operating system is all like extremely mature at this point. And maybe the application agent model could be more mature, but the actual like kernel level, like, oh, what can you do with it? Like, oh, what type of math? Like, what type of XML can you output? How can you do HTTP server, normal stuff? Like, I don't know. It took us a week to make a like full featured, like complete credit card flow. It took us like, I don't know, another week to make a static site publishing tool that takes data from your like landscape app. Like say you have a blog in landscape, you can just publish it direct to web and you can like pick between different templates. You can be like, I want it to look like Substack.
That only took a week?
Yeah, it took a week.
Interesting.
And so like all of these, like we're just gluing together things that already exist. And I mean, I have a lot of experience already with these tools. And so it's kind of a matter of like, what are we wanting to do? And most of everything that we want doesn't require us to go build any new components from scratch.
Okay, I think that'll surprise and excite a lot of people listening to this, maybe engineers or, potential founders. I think maybe don't realize how relatively quick it can be to build these things, thanks to the affordances that are kind of already baked into the Urbit network. So that's very interesting. I mean, what do you guys have intuitions about the next businesses that should or will be built on Urbit? Like when you look at the space especially from a business perspective, like what needs to be built tomorrow? What should investors be investing in tomorrow or founders be founding tomorrow?
Well, we've been calling it the personal server revolution or the glorious personal server revolution. And what that is a revolution against, obviously, is incumbent SaaS businesses. So I think it's really up to the entrepreneur to pick a particularly low-hanging SaaS model and build an Urbit analog.
Okay, so let's go to the example you used, which is a note-taking app. The massive market. What would it take to build a startup that's, let's say, Rome Research but on Urbit, or Notion but on Urbit?
Sure.
What would it take to do that? Is it really that simple? It can't be that simple. So walk us through, like, because I'm sure there are people watching this or listening to this who would love to think about building on Urbit. How hard is that? Like, what would it look like? What are the trade-offs between doing that on Urbit or off of Urbit? Because I talked to some founders recently, or just regularly, really, who are building badass shit in like Web3 or whatever, and it's often people who are philosophically interested in Urbit, know about Urbit, like Urbit. And when I kind of pick their brain, the reason some people aren't building on Urbit is because their perception that they want to move faster and they want to use more known technologies, basically. So what do you say to that kind of engineer or developer or founder?
Got it. So yeah, so there's kind of a trade-off here. And the trade-off is that the technologies that Urbit is made with are not optimized for ease of learning. They're optimized for ease of use. And so the problem that all of those people are running up against is they say, oh, I want to make a decentralized Twitter, or I want to make X or Y. The fastest way for me to do that is to use what I know. It's to use Python or Node.js or Ethereum plus Python or whatever. And if they're literally going from like, okay, I want to make my company and do it as soon as possible, well, yeah, I mean, learning Hoon's going to take them some time, and they're not going to be most effective in that if they're trying to start doing something.
Right. So that's the bottleneck, really, is learning Hoon.
Yeah, but there's so many people that are already learning Hoon at this stage that all of those people are extremely ripe to go make their own company or make their own little app development DAO or their own little studio or whatever. And so the bottleneck for them, I think, at this stage is that currently, if they did want to monetize it, they'd have to roll their own way of monetizing. They'd have to find some way in the Stripe terms of service or the Braintree terms of service to kind of finagle a way to sell a product to people within Urbit. And I think that would actually be fairly difficult to do because these terms of services are built for SaaS companies. They're not built for server-to-server, peer-to-peer protocols. They're built for client-server. Oh, you control all the data. You can do content moderation. You can do all these things. You can do all these forms of censorship. And so this is actually where our company comes in, and this is what we're trying to enable.
Right.
So we're trying to explicitly enable other companies to come and make money, literally to receive payments, to have people buy their app, to have people do subscriptions for their app. Because if they don't have to continue to roll their own payment mechanism, then suddenly you can have, I pay $5 and now I have collaborative Google Docs, but on Urbit, or collaborative presentation software, but on Urbit. And you actually have a monetization mechanism for that, aside from just the Urbit Foundation giving you a one-time grant.
Right. Yeah. So payments are, when you look at Web3, fiat payments, at least, we'll be specific, are the minimum required centralization to any application that you expect people to pay for on a regular basis. And so for that specific pain point, we have basically built a regime of specialty underwriting around Web3 applications. And that's what we are looking to bring to bear to get people who are, some, cottage industry, Urbit app developer monetized without having to run the gauntlet of some of these larger, more adverse payment processors.
Okay. And when you say these kind of specialty underwriting that you refer to, like what do you have in mind?
It's literally just bringing underwriting up to up to our speed on peer-to-peer technology, and then basically giving them the new vocabulary of the Urbit internet.
Give some color on underwriting specifically. Like, I don't think a lot of people have the
it's not
depth
gonna
and
be
the
clear.
Sure. So when I say underwriting, I mean, a person at a bank that the bank processes payments, and to acquire that service, the merchant who is applying needs to pass certain risk checks, and have a certain risk profile that's tolerable to the bank. And so there are certain things that are risky that you might not think are risky, but they're red flags to banks.
Sure.
So for example, like a lifetime subscription is technically a product that could be charged back at any point in its lifetime. So that's a very small example, but there are things like that app developers don't really think of. And for people that are building vanilla SaaS products, they're usually just consolidated into the Stripe verse.
Mhm.
And once you stray outside of that, you try to do anything approaching, a peer-to-peer marketplace or anything distributed, it starts to strain those underwriting parameters. So
Interesting. Okay.
So what we're doing is basically bringing sort of strict legal expertise to the matter to kick these things through.
I see. Okay. So basically Web3 is stretching the definitions of all of these things in the traditional financial system.
Right.
So you're not only building payment rails, but you're basically trying to build out a whole kind of legal and financial infrastructure that fits more sensibly with the Web3 patterns.
Correct. I mean, when you look at what Urbit does, it completely outstrips legacy notions of top-down Platonic control over data and systems. And so Logan's a Deleuzean, so we're just trying to make it work for people who are trying to overcode the flows.
Nice. Go ahead.
No, that's good.
Yeah, no, I wonder, I mean, how explicit do you think that metaphor goes? I mean, what is the Deleuzian understanding of the financial rails that you're building?
Well, I mean, truly, the current financial system, though it wants to be rhizomatic, it does truly desire to be a rhizome. You can tell from the way that capital moves within the system. The way that it essentially changes phase, as you might say. It becomes more solid in some places and sticks. It evaporates in others. It melts in others and then flows rapidly downhill to some say valley where it can accumulate and then grow in strength and create new life. So capital is exit, of course, and so capital is always exiting any system that is trying to contain it. And so the current system has some really interesting regimes that work to suppress capital. And in some ways it's not successful, certainly, and people point out these deficits frequently, but people don't always see the ways in which the system contains capital. And so moving away from I guess the psychiatrist's chair and the Oedipal means of containing these flows of capital. You have Big Daddy government and Big Mama Elizabeth Warren.
And I mean, most corporatists, then the tension here is, the human tendency to try to encapsulate and define and heighten certainty around things.
It's what
that's why cronies like to be there when regulation is being written, because they actually, humans desire a dictatorship which would secure some sort of monopoly.
It's what Nick Land calls the human security system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Bitcoin, Urbit, they literally come from the outside to dissolve those binds of the human security system.
Now you speak my language. This is good. So It's absolutely fascinating. So, like, what kinds of specific formations do you imagine the financial world of the future kind of embodying or giving form to that are currently suppressed by the human security system?
Sure. So I think the place to start with this is really where Christian and I met. So this was a few years ago. I was already working at Urbit, but I actually hadn't met Christian at all at this stage, and we were going on a hike with some friends, and Christian got the poor job of picking me up and then bringing me to Mount Diablo, where we were hiking in I guess NorCal somewhere.
It's in Walnut Creek, California. It's a good hike. I recommend it to your Bay Area listeners.
Yeah, lovely hike, especially when you don't get lost. So I get picked up by Christian, and we don't know each other, and we start talking about random stuff, and we quickly realize that Christian is very interested in Bitcoin. I am too, but I don't know to the same degree. And so it ends up that throughout this entire 20-mile, 5,000 feet elevation hike, I'm, at least when I can catch my breath, convincing Christian that Urbit is not a shitcoin. And that Urbit is in fact not a scam and is a real thing that Bitcoin needs.
Okay.
And so this is how our friendship began.
Nice.
And how I eventually, roped him into working at Talon somehow.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I think I mentioned this on my last appearance on the Murphyverse. I came to put Bitcoin on Urbit mainly due to the congruence of Bitcoin and Urbit's utilization of a personal server as an implement for sovereignty or
Totally sound money and sound computing.
Yeah, that was the meme. So to that extent, I think that there's a natural affinity here. So now that we've built the Bitcoin wallet and it's well on its way to having its next generation of capabilities with Lightning, I think it's time for Urbit to have perhaps a less radical conception of commerce. Obviously, as a Bitcoin maximalist, I'm all in. However, I still make the majority of my daily payments with dollars. So to see something like an Urbit app store succeed, you really need to inject just typical US dollars in there and then have them exist on as many interior surfaces as possible and exterior surfaces. So really what I think our vision is, if we could relate it succinctly, would be that anyone desiring to either make an application on Urbit or simply provide a good or a service from Urbit as their platform, we would seek to be your partner in that.
Awesome. Now, you guys mentioned before these themes of exit. We're already talking about Nick Land and Deleuze and many fun ideas.
Don't show this to the underwriters.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you underwrite the risk of, we won't even go there, but
Neo China discounted Back to the Future.
This is a very relevant question though, actually, because it's exactly what I was going to ask you about really, which is what do you see as the main kind of push factors that are going to be bringing people to exit, right? So one candidate would be, what people call cancel culture, censorship, whatever you want to call it, is the thesis that basically the current financial rails that are dominated by mommy and daddy and the human security system, people are going to need to exit those because the current financial system is so kind of politically brittle. And so basically you're building kind of like the financial rails of exit. So when people have to leave the current financial system for political problems, or what other push factors do you think it's going to be that are really going to accelerate the use of your payment rails?
Sure. I think that I would even take a step back from saying, cancel. It's like, you're going to be personally canceled. And so you're going to have to leave the current financial system.
Right.
And I would actually make a much more generic, but maybe also more strong claim that what we're actually looking at is heat death of the current financial system. Just a really, really slow heating up of a dying star that's just not going to really be continuing for the
Fascinating.
lifetimes of
Right.
anyone.
So it's not
who's-
even political. It's just basically too much complexity, too many kind of ad hoc solutions that have been like papered on or glued on top of each other to withstand too much of a challenge that basically it's going to break from under its own weight. It's not even political.
So
it's just entropy.
it's just entropy. Yeah.
I would say there's a once again to plug my intellectual heritage of Bitcoin, but I think there's a real similarity between the extreme complexity of the financial system as it exists today, the money market, derivatives, etc., and also the client server paradigm that basically both require borderline graybeards to actually operate. At the highest level, it's
Boomers.
It's boomer alchemists who are in short supply and cannot find a way. There's no way to.
You can't transfer the skill.
You can't transfer the skill. You can't learn the principles of monetary economics and go make your own monetary system. Unless it's completely Luciferian in the case of Bitcoin. You're not going to be allowed to make any type of incremental innovation.
What do you mean by transfer skills and what do you mean by an incremental innovation? You're talking about the current financial system doesn't allow for these things?
I'm saying that there's a crisis point of complexity to both, where
right.
ordinary people who have an idea of, oh, this computer thing should exist. I should be able to view my bank account in real time on an Excel spreadsheet because I'm interested in personal finance. You'll just never get through the absolute thicket of technical debt to achieve something like that.
Totally.
That's a product I've wanted since I was old enough to know what a bank account was and have Excel, but I've never had it.
And what you're implying, I think, is that in a mature Urbit ecosystem, it should be pretty trivial to whip up these little like personal finance apps. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
That's the idea. Yeah. Programmatic finance in a sort of true and, not to use the D word, but a truly disintermediated way.
Right. So if I'm being paid, let's say a certain kind of income streams, right, and I have some outgoing payments, these really are just data. These are just data streams, right? It should be, there's no reason in principle why these numbers that change a couple times a month are not immediately available to me at all times for arbitrary computation.
They
right?
are in my crypto wallet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you imagine a world where on your Urbit, you can basically be computing this data, manipulating it, visualizing it, sending it from one app to the next. That should be relatively trivial.
Anything you want. Yeah.
Right. And right now it's very, very difficult, right?
So what I would note is that the state of the art for bank integration software is Plaid. And literally what they do is they have headless web browsers. What that means is a web browser that does display the page, but it doesn't display it on a screen. It displays it and takes a picture of it. And so what they do is you give them your bank password. And then they go make a fake web browser that goes and renders your bank account page, takes a picture of what the balance is, and then uses screen reading software to go read what the balance is and tell you what it is. That's the state of the art for bank integration software.
Right. Yeah. I
It's
use that all the time.
insane.
Yeah.
That's the most popular bank integration software. And they literally take pictures of the web page and read the number off the web page.
It's such a good example to dramatize how stupid the current internet is.
It's insane because you can't incentivize the banks to allow you to programmatically use your account. You can't make them do it. And the EU is actually trying to force them to with the legislation, and so far have failed.
Okay, fascinating. So I think this helps people understand what's going on with Urbit. So as Urbit develops, instead of using Plaid on the clear web, where every time you want to connect one bank to another, you have to kind of go through this ridiculous process, you will just have in your account, certain financial accounts, right? You'll have a bank, you'll have, crypto wallet or whatever it might be, right? And you're just going to be able to interact with any number of different apps or communities programmatically directly. So like natively. So in other words, like, how today when you, let's say, make a new account on some website, you have to go manually add your bank details.
Yeah.
Whereas in the future on Urbit, it's like once you approve of an app or you download an app or you enter a community, all of your bank data is potentially available for you, right? So you could maybe just click a button and pay, right?
Yeah.
So all of that plumbing that today we have to do manually over and over again, or use ridiculous tools like Plaid to kind of paper over it, all of that disappears. And it's basically just smooth. You either choose to pay or you don't. It's all baked in.
It's like the Apple Wallet on iOS, except brought to the internet with no permissions.
Yeah, hell yeah. Fascinating.
Right. Or as I frequently refer to it, the cypherpunk WeChat.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. So, I mean, what kind of legal issues do you see on the horizon? Like, a lot of people are kind of worried right now about, Gensler and Liz Warren talking about, assets and securities and stuff. It probably is not so relevant here, but
yeah, luckily that's not relevant to our business, really.
Right. But I'm sure there are going to be kind of legal challenges. And maybe the point is not to get into weeds of like laws or anything like that. I'm just curious, this kind of permissionless world, that's basically, as we describe it, it's going to basically overthrow the banks. Like you're basically routing around the banks, and with the money and power that they have, like what do you expect on the horizon of that battle?
So what we're doing is basically trying to take the complete morass that is compliance, regulatory compliance, and make it effectively a service. So compliance as a service is what will let someone with a completely consolidated terms and conditions access, all these multifaceted services from one point.
Interesting. So when people make an account through a Tirrel service, they'll be, presumably signing some kind of terms of service, and then they're good to go for like the entire Urbit ecosystem. That's the idea.
That's the idea.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And then, as we evolve, obviously not to count chickens or anything like that, but obviously we would be headed toward, some sort of neobank type status in the future. I've been an observer since about 2017, and I can say that lately the bank regulation has actually been showing some signs of life. So we've seen, the speedy banks in Wyoming, which are special depository institutions, just the bank charter application process reopening up. So I think that in the future, who knows, it's like we're all building this financial infrastructure for the duration that the US dollar exists or that fiat currency is widely used. So we're all making this in advance of, call it some hyper Bitcoinization event. However, I think that as we get closer to that, there will be moments of opportunity for to advance our case in the regulatory environment.
Sure. Fascinating.
So I think what I would say is, everybody's talking about Web3 right now, and all of the regulation that's occurring is about, Web3 and decentralized exchanges and stable coins. Urbit is Web 6. So like, because Urbit is Web 6, like no one is even thinking about what we were trying to do.
Right.
And so no one's doing anything that's even remotely like negative toward what we're trying to do. For all they're concerned, we're like PayPal or like Venmo. It's like, oh, like it's Venmo except peer to peer, and everybody's like, oh, well, I already thought Venmo was peer to peer. I just sent it to your phone number. It's like,
right. Yes,
the peer to peer skeuomorphism is a great trick that basically every SaaS company deploys.
Yeah, it's like, what if it looked like it was peer to peer? Like, what if you thought your Facebook message was going to their phone because you typed in their phone number into Facebook?
Right.
It's like, what if you didn't think that there was an intermediary because you thought it worked like SMS?
Yeah, fascinating. So let's talk a little bit about what you expect payments to look like on Urbit as these technologies get adopted. Like, where do you think points of purchase are likely to emerge? A lot of this is kind of going to be figured out in practice and experimentation, but for instance, like they just released the software distribution is now live, so people can write apps and push them to the network and share them with people on the network.
Yeah, sell your apps.
Yeah. So what is it going to look like? Do you think like if I want to make a note-taking app, I get some engineers, right? We launch it. Are we selling it on some kind of app store on Urbit? Are we selling it peer-to-peer? So like individuals will choose to pay $5 for my note-taking app, or is it going into some kind of space that kind of aggregates demand, like some kind of marketplace? Like how do you see the most likely points of purchase patterns to emerge?
I think it'll start peer-to-peer. And then I think that just like most things, there will be aggregators that begin to have network effects.
Okay.
And I think those aggregators will become de facto app stores. And I think that there will kind of be like reputation-oriented aggregators that are like, hey, we put a lot of effort into making sure that they're not doing any funny business with your data.
And do you think these aggregators are themselves apps, or is it like groups?
No, it's identities.
It's identities. So individuals will kind of be
individuals
curators.
or groups that represent themselves as an identity in the way that we represent ourselves as Tirrel.
Right. Okay. So basically what you're saying is I need to start finding all the app makers. I need to become the nexus.
Yeah,
of,
you
of
should
app
be a
makers,
curator.
and I can make my group on Urbit basically like where all of app
Yeah,
builders and app sellers go.
Yeah,
or
you
something
could
like
have
that.
a little blog in Other Life that's app reviews.
This is what. So what I'm getting at is this will be like a cultural layer, not like an app layer, basically. So it'll be like individuals or groups with that centralized attention or aggregate attention and command attention.
At first, but
right.
but then there will be ways in which there will become cultural defaults.
Right.
And so it'll start as just, a little group in which you do something, and then it'll become a cultural default, and then there'll be utilities built around it to speed up that process.
Okay.
To say, how many stars is it? How many stars does Justin say it is?
And so in the first instance, in the short term, when it's just individual to individual, what will it look like? Like, so will it be, like in the Urbit DMs, there's like a payment button? Is it going to be in the Urbit notebooks? There's going to be like a buy button? Like very concretely, I'm just curious how you expect to see it.
My guess would be that you install the desk. So you install the tile. And then there's
the tile,
a little,
meaning this is like in grid.
In grid, yeah.
Okay.
And then so for whatever app you're trying to buy.
For people listening, so this is the new like software distribution interface. Basically, it's called grid.
And there are tiles.
It's what you see when you first log in.
Yeah.
Right. It's tiles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
so I'd say you install the tile, and then you probably like do a payment, and it like works then.
Gotcha. And at the moment, there's no discovery, right? So you just have to basically. Someone who builds an app needs to basically give you the ID or something like that, and then you
just be like, "Hey, I'm dope, and I'm making this note-taking app. Come download it."
Right. So basically, I build a note-taking app. I just basically give people the ID or something like that, and then they go into their grid.
Sure.
And they import it.
There's already effectively an almanac of Urbit, which is Urbit Index.
Mm-hmm.
So the information of where to find this stuff will be already aggregated under something like that. But effectively, it doesn't, there's no special process to, there's no code review like with the Apple App Store. There's no subjectivity to it.
Gotcha. And so, okay, so I give people the ID for my note-taking app. People go into their grid, they import it, and they're using it. And then I just ask them to like DM me money, or like, or is there a formal?
You click the tile.
Right.
It shows you a new web page. The new web page says, "Hey, pay us $5, and then you can use the app."
Got it. And that's what you're building, basically.
Yeah.
That would be like a Tirrel like landing page with the payment button.
Yeah. To be fair, we haven't started building that exact functionality.
Gotcha.
Right now, we're really focused on Planet sales on layer 2.
Okay.
And so, like, Talana's been building a layer 2. They call it Naive, and the idea is, people are selling stars, people are selling galaxies, but people aren't really selling planets right now. And so people are giving planets away, but there aren't that many people selling planets. You're one of the only ones I'm aware of. And so that's because of these insane Ethereum fees. And EIP 1559 did not help. I mean, it just killed the bottom of the market. It like normalized the fees so that they're all just at the high level.
Yeah.
And so the gist with this is the layer 2 circumvents this. And so we're building a US dollar fiat payment flow where you can just go buy planets on layer 2 without ever touching Ethereum. And so this is what we're actually doing like this instant, or what I'm doing this instant.
And when do you plan for that to be available?
I'd say probably by beginning of November.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So that might even be, this might be out then. So
Sure. So
Yeah.
that's when the layer 2 is launching. So I may have it completely done before the layer 2 launches and then just wait for the layer 2 to launch.
okay,
So
fascinating.
Yeah, but soon.
soon,
Soon,
yeah, very,
sure.
very soon. I mean,
TM. 2 weeks, TM.
yeah, I mean, the layer 2 is supposed to launch at the very beginning of November. So if it hits mid-November, then we'll launch with the layer 2.
Right on.
But it's very soon. It's almost done. And so essentially what that means is that any person who owns a star can just click a few buttons, buy a domain, and have a website that's dedicated to selling planets. And the only thing that they have to do in terms of like asynchronous processes or something that's not just clicking buttons on an Urbit is they have to apply for a merchant ID from us. And then they can accept US dollar payments for Urbit planets, which notably you wouldn't be able to do with Stripe or Braintree, et cetera, because it's a crypto asset.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
it would be against their terms of service. It's been tried.
Oh, fascinating. Okay, so
So we're the only game in town.
right. So since Stripe can't do crypto based things, if once you crack that egg, then you can be like the Stripe for crypto, basically.
At least the Stripe for Urbit crypto.
Yeah. Okay. Fascinating. Well, what else is going on right now that you're kind of most excited about or most interested in? What are your best Urbit takes or beyond Urbit? Open.
Hot Urbit takes.
Yeah, I mean, are there other startups being built that you're aware of that you want to shout out and kind of give us some clues about it? I think it's fascinating here, or just other projects going on.
Right now, I'm interested in any project that lets me make the marginal transition between some SaaS app and Urbit, so that I'm basically spending more time on Urbit.
Right.
So for that, obviously, ChatFM
The video chat
is an audio and video chat.
This is like the WebRTC.
Yep. And
Chat FM.
ChatFM. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but I would say that when that is up and running at scale and everyone has it installed, and it can push notifications to your phone and ring your phone, I think that's huge.
Oh, ring your phone, like phone calls?
Yeah, basically, but like FaceTime.
Wow, really?
FaceTime.
Through a normal iPhone or whatever?
Phone.
Wow.
Phone.
Dude, because I didn't even know that. I know there's I just thought it was like video chatting, like Zoom on Urbit.
Well, video and audio. It's agnostic.
I didn't know it was going to go through your phone though. That's cool.
Well, it could, because your phone supports WebRTC.
Right on. Okay, I see. Fascinating. Okay, so basically things that allow you to stay in Urbit more. So what are other candidates maybe that aren't being worked on? Like, what do you think is the next business that should be built or needs to be built? Like tomorrow, if you're an investor or a founder, like what do you think is most ripe that isn't being worked on?
Dude, I want Google Drive. Like, I don't even care about storing files. I just literally want like a presentation editor and like a little like document editor that's collaborative that I can just mess around with like, one other person, and be like, is this legal copy right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else?
I mean, well, I too want Google Drive, but I also want files in general. I feel like I spend half my day just attaching things and sending them to people.
Right.
And if I could do that within the Urbit envelope, that would be better for me.
And are these relatively lightweight projects, or are these relatively big projects? I know you mentioned earlier that some of this stuff can be built fast. Like, are these big or small?
Making it collaborative in real time, big project. Making a presentation editor at all or a document editor at all, small project.
Okay, yeah. So people who are engineers or people out there listening to this should really think about getting involved and trying to build some of these things, because it's such an open space, right? It's like basically any basic app that people use, you can make an Urbit version.
Yeah.
Right.
And people will jump on and be super excited and happy with you for doing it.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of think note taking is like one of the best ones because the market is so big.
Yeah.
And it's like so buzzy also. Like any like decent note taking app nowadays, even if it's just like a clone of Notion or a clone of Roam or something like that, like it just gets a ton of buzz, and a lot of people are interested to try it out. And Urbit definitely could use an improved writing experience.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that's like I would love to see that. Yeah.
Yeah. Other exciting stuff. I'm really excited for the foundation to split out of Talon.
Yeah.
I'm super hyped for that.
Why?
Because there need to be more entities with varied incentives and varied power structures that are working on the Urbit ecosystem that have sizable address space allocations such that they can use those strategically to further the network as opposed to just holding them.
Right. Right.
Like Talon has a particular strategy that it uses for its address space. It hires people, it sells galaxies every few years, and it builds stuff that it wants to build.
Something that came up with Ed this morning was a discussion around Internet of Things and kind of building out things like moons and like building systems where you could feasibly, like, all of your friends and family like have a moon or something, like, and you could actually start to imagine physical devices with like sensors and stuff like that are like feeding it. We got kind of futuristic with it. Is this like interesting to you? Is this kind of a dead end, or what do you think?
It would work, but I don't have any interest in it.
Not interested, yeah.
I'm in favor of reducing the number of sensors in
Yeah.
my life.
Okay.
I mean,
just kind of against it.
we already have, I don't know, probably a total of 15 different cameras in this room, 15 different microphones.
Freaking you out.
Excluding these. I mean,
But not even counting the ones that are in the pinholes that I haven't told you
well,
about.
yeah, exactly. Every device just has sensors out the wazoo nowadays.
You hate it. You're just
So-
against. You're against
I'm
the control societies.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm against. It's just digital subjectivity on every designed piece of software of technology that you pick up. It's just your control is engineered.
Yeah, see,
into
I'm
it.
kind of into measurement and control if it's autonomous and you control it, right? To me,
It's
yeah.
controlling you. It's
Right.
You're controlling it, controlling you, and so
Right.
it's the Ouroboros. It's the it's the serpentine coils of constricting control.
Right. So in a fully mature kind of Urbit ecosystem, it just basically allows you to kind of escape all technological entrapment. Or what?
No, it lets you control yourself and be in that cycle as much or as little as you want.
Yeah, I think I'm more on the like I want sensors.
Yeah.
I want like my house to be filled with measuring devices.
On an
and
auto
then-
turret.
Yeah. and then I have like all these machine learning models that are basically like constantly optimizing me and giving me like feedback. And yeah, I think I'm into that as long as I have complete control over it and I can manipulate my friends and family how I want to. No, I'm just kidding.
It's so fuzzy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think my ideal scenario is that I stop having a phone and I have some like smaller device that only does calls and texts, but it does it well. And I tried an Apple Watch, it doesn't do it well. But I want something that does a few things well, like directions, phone, and text, and that's it.
Yeah.
I don't want anything else. And I don't even care what else it does. Like I, in fact, don't want it to do other things. And then I want just like an e-ink display that I can do things on for work. And those are like the only devices I want in my house.
Right. How long until you think Urbit provides all of those things and you don't need anything else?
Again, I'm really skeptical of Urbit's current ability to do graphical interfaces.
Right.
So my estimate would be kind of unpleasant for most people to hear, like 15 years.
But you could basically have a computer that's not Urbit.
Yeah, you
but
could
only,
cheat. You
but
could
only
cheat.
be running Urbit stuff, basically.
Yeah, you could cheat and have it next year. Like you could cheat and have like a Chromium, like a Chrome OS type deal where like the browser is what you see and it's on Urbit.
Right. I was actually saying that to Ed. I think it'd be kind of a fun project to like, what if you just bought wholesale a bunch of
Mhm.
like basic laptops and booted them with Urbit, got them all set up
Mhm.
so that like you could sell them on the secondary market just as like an Urbit laptop, basically.
Yeah, you could do that right now.
I think that's kind of that kind of resonates with me.
Sure.
Like I think that's kind of cool.
It's the purism that you're not going to get for 15, 20 years. But like you can always in the engineering world cheat and get to where you want way faster. And it's not really cheating unless you're one of those like Linux is bad and has to go people.
Right. So I heard that there's a communist threat on Urbit. Are there a lot of communists? How many people are even on Urbit? Do we know at this point? What's your guess?
I thought you were a communist.
I used to be.
Used to be.
Well, now I'm kind of like
I don't know.
Can you stop being a communist?
I mean, I'm like a good kind of. I'm like.
I thought that the right wing had completely, reformulated and memed themselves back into communism.
Yeah,
Or,
no,
or,
it is.
or at least like Logo would have.
Yeah,
think, so.
there's some strange horseshoe dynamics going on. No, I used to be a legit hardcore communist. I'm not anymore. Now I'm just like post political basically. But what I have still taken on from my time as a communist is basically just what I would rebrand as like communitarianism, like deep solidarity with like small communities, basically.
Absolutely.
And that I think is like that's the healthy kernel in communism. It goes wrong when you try to like force it at a large scale, basically.
Right.
But as long as it's completely voluntary and the bond, so basically like the family is basically like a communist unit of the good kind.
Right. I think John Maus talks about this a bunch, and trying to break down barriers that would keep us from seeing each other, and not just in a physical sense, but perceiving each other's humanity.
Hell
and
yeah.
so, I mean, I find that Christ-like and worthy of pursuit.
Hell yeah. We should talk about that because I think we're all Christian men here.
It's true.
Is Urbit a technological instantiation of Christian ideals?
Urbit is a technology for preserving human dignity.
Say more about that.
So all of the technologies that we have eschew human dignity. They throw it out the window in favor of ad-based optimization of optimizing you to be engaged and to be a, adult fiend of staring into the blue light and
Coon brain
and all of these things, like being engaged with the outrage, being scared of the virus, being this or being that. There's all these things to be scared of. There's all these people to hate. There's all these things to buy. and this is the cybernetic enclosure. It's every one of these things that makes you feel an emotion from looking at a screen instead of feeling an emotion from looking at a human face. And so Urbit to me is a technology for removing the emotion from the computer, because the computer is not where the emotion should be.
That's great. Yeah, that's really good. I like that. So basically Urbit is Deleuzian, Landian, Christian, and anti-communist, but there are some communists on there. So communists can kind of have their own Urbit, right?
Communists can do anything they want.
Right.
That's the joy of Urbit, is that Urbit is also post-political in this way. Like Urbit allows people to form their own little. Urbit just over time is going to reflect your mind. It's going to reflect who you want to talk to and what you want to do.
And to be clear, I think that there will be a large portion of our generation that once the fully perfected computing Urbit system is ready, they actually won't be able to extricate themselves from dopamine addiction.
Yeah.
And they will voluntarily submit to the Urbit metaverse, where you basically live in the crypto voxel, mining Minecraft blocks, but it's your Urbit messages and your, all of your conspicuous consumption is NFTs, and you're blinged out in the metaverse. Yeah. And you have the morphine drip and the Soylent drip in the other arm.
Interesting. So you're kind of describing like a bifurcating world where some people are going to fall deeper and deeper down into the cybernetic entrapment.
Well, believe me,
some people are going to go to Urbit and like improve themselves.
Oh no, like everyone's coming to Urbit. What I'm saying is, even there's going to be, we will be naive to think that there won't be some sort of counter revolution by companies that are completely used to making money in the attention economy, etc., trying to pump their systems into Urbit and essentially capture people in this landscape. Yeah, recapture people.
Urbit just is going to provide a choice to leave that attention landscape.
Right.
But it doesn't remove that choice. Right. Currently landscape is all calm and everything, but there's going to be fart apps, and there's going to be things that I wouldn't approve of, and there's going to be all kinds of things that I wouldn't want to be on Urbit, but because I'm not Urbit and Urbit is just this neutral thing.
Right.
I mean,
Urbit is going to be a container for everything that's on the internet today. It's just a container that you have choices and that you have control over.
Right.
Okay. So
Urbit Candy Crush is going to exist, and there will be the same people who play Candy Crush now will play Candy Crush on Urbit. They'll get served the ads the same way.
Urbit World of Warcraft. People playing video games for 24 hours and having heart attacks because they haven't left their chair.
Fascinating.
These are going to happen. These are going to occur, but it won't be foisted on the person.
The key thing being that the people who want something different, who don't want to be exposed to addicting games and don't want to be exposed to porn,
Mhm.
things like that. People who want to be away from all of that are going to be able to be away from all of that
Completely.
completely, right?
Yes.
And that's
Though I will say, I mean, again, maybe this is just my pessimism, but the gate will remain narrow, I think, to use the Christian metaphor. I don't think
Right.
that even though there's the option for calm computing and everyone says that they want it, there's, TFW, the first sip of the day, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everyone wakes up and it's like,
Totally.
you have your first scroll, the first jewel hit, the
Right.
first sip.
So the gate will be narrow, meaning that in the long run, Urbit will probably be 90% porn, just like the current internet is 90% porn.
Hopefully less.
Hopefully less.
Hopefully less, and hopefully without some sort of overarching sort of a slanted economics to Urbit software development. It will actually tend in terms of the right stuff, but it won't.
I mean, Urbit won't eliminate sin economies, but it won't drive everyone towards them either.
Right.
Currently, the systems that we have are cybernetic enclosures that move you towards pornography.
Right.
That move you towards outrage.
Everyone is kind of pulled towards those gravity wells in a way.
And so my thought is that Urbit's not going to eliminate the human tendencies to sin towards these things, but rather Urbit will at least be a neutral landscape that's not tilted toward them.
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating and makes a lot of sense. I mean, a counterpoint would be, a more optimistic perspective would be that because people who are committed to dignity and kind of more conscientious lives on Urbit are able to kind of secure that power, at least for themselves and their communities, their friends, family, followers. That greater power will give the people in those communities probably more successful life results in a way. And so they'll be able to start to maybe in the long run kind of outcompete the sin economies, which are actually pretty backwards and regressive and generally
absolutely
not good for human potential and human productivity anyway. So on a truly even playing field where there's not this like massive gravity well towards sin, you could actually imagine the more wholesome groups gaining more influence, bigger size, because people at the end of the day will need to choose, like, do you want to be a good person who's following the straight and narrow path and all of the beneficial results that come from that kind of healthier lifestyle, or do you want to just be like addicted to Candy Crush all day? And when that choice is more stark and you can kind of like choose which one you want to be in, I think more people will realize, everything would be way better if I go with the more wholesome one. Right. So in a way, I think there is a possible future in which, even if the gate is narrow, the mass of the wholesome is like a much larger mass. If you read like St. Augustine in the City of God, he has this kind of very clear conviction that in the very long run, the city of God does win. Maybe not like on earth. But
the gates of hell shall not prevail. Yeah,
that's right.
Today we have the Mormons, we have the Mennonites, the Amish, and I think that if you consider those to be healthy, if somewhat isolated societies, but at least unto themselves healthy societies, Urbit could at least hopefully 100x to put a tech.
I mean, I would say maybe like spin out many more. Say 1,000 flowers shall bloom of genres of Mennonites. Genres.
Right. Let there be many more societies of health, and not to revert again back to my ideology of Bitcoin, but I think, to be honest, even more so when you want to talk about behavioral change, I think the software you use is a large part of it, but the monetary media that you use is probably an even bigger part, because personal economics are really where your preferences are ultimately revealed, at least for the most part. So I recently heard from my friend Saifedean. He ran this poll. People who got into Bitcoin are basically, on average, approximately saving more than double what they used to, because it's an orientation towards a low time preference activity versus high time preference. When you don't have inflation, you're able to orient yourself toward the future, toward your goals. And I think that that's actually a much more perhaps potent corrective mental economic than just is your software beeping at you all the time to pick it up again?
But
Totally.
the combination, though.
But the combination.
Yeah. Dude, I love
Yeah.
it. This was awesome. That was an awesome ending. I'm super pumped just talking about this stuff with you guys.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere you want to send people before we wrap it up?
Tirrel.io.
Tirrel.io. And yeah, you can hit us up at Tirrel just on Urbit if you need to speak with us urgently.
Boom. I'll put links in the show notes. Guys, thanks so much for hanging out with me. This was a fascinating and at times unpredictable conversation that went to a bunch of different pockets that I wasn't necessarily predicting, but were really fucking cool. So thanks, guys. Yeah, this is awesome.
Thanks,
Thank
man.
you, Justin.
All right, guys. Good luck with Tirrel and everything.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
We'll see
All
you
right.
everyone later on.